Good morning. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday morning service here at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Laguna Beach. And I would love to encourage those who are here in the building to come closer if you like. We are having a speaker issue this morning. And so I'm going to trust the folks on Zoom to let us know through our audiovisual tech if we're having any audio problems on Zoom. And otherwise, hopefully my voice will come across well here in the building. We are so delighted that you have all joined us here today for worship at UUFLB. The land on which we join together in worship is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Ahashiman and Tongva tribes. And we offer our gratitude to the First Nations for their care of the earth and for their teachings. And with humility, we commit to learning and working on the behalf of justice. My name is Pamela Floodman, and I will be serving as your worship associate today. And our Zoom and audiovisual techs are Don West Jr. and Dara Skorecki. Our music will be led by our talented music director, Carol Cole. And we really are grateful for all of the members and friends of this congregation, the amazing team of people who make it possible for us to gather here for worship on Sunday mornings. So thank you to all. Today is Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday. So this is a day to honor the birth of this man who tirelessly worked to advance the cause of equal rights. The inspiring actions and words of Martin Luther King remind Americans everywhere to work for racial, economic, and international justice. Our centering thought this morning is from Martin Luther King's acceptance speech upon receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo 60 years ago in 1964. And I think these words also speak to us today, 60 years later. They're on the screen. I'm not sure if you can see them, but I will read them and read along with me if you like. Make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a better person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. This morning, we are so delighted to welcome Reverend Rica Kaufel as our guest minister. It has been a couple of years, I think, since Reverend Rica was last with us here at UUFLB, and it is so wonderful to have her back with us, although this time she's here with us by Zoom, given that Reverend Rica is now in Germany. Originally born in Berlin, Reverend Rica Kaufel moved to the U.S. for college when she was 20, and after graduation, she decided to stay and work in the field of education and applied linguistics. Then she decided to become a minister. She did her internship at the Orange Coast Unitarian Universalist Church, one of our nearby congregations, and she was ordained in 2021 and worked as a part-time minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Anaheim. And Reverend Rica also guest preached at many churches here in Southern California, and she says that she has very fond memories of her visits here with us at UUFLB. But she grew increasingly homesick during the pandemic and decided to move back to Berlin, even though that would put an end to her career as a UU minister, or so she thought, because it just happens that there is a Unitarian community in Germany who was excited to hire her, and she has been working with them since July of last summer, 2022. And clearly, she's also able to be a UU minister working with congregations here in the U.S. as well. You may have been as intrigued as I was to read the brief description that Reverend Rica gave us about the service she'll be leading today. On this Martin Luther King Sunday, we will explore how the best friend of Reverend Rica's German grandfather, ended up in Nebraska drawing parrots, and what this has to do with the American ideals that we hold most dear. So I want to thank Reverend Rica for joining us here today at UUFLB, for helping us honor Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and to carry his work forward in the world. Our gathering music this morning was Do What the Spirits Say, performed by Sweet Honey in the Rock. And there are multiple recordings of this on YouTube. I actually wanted to use a different recording, but the sound quality didn't come over well enough here when we got here in the building. But I'll encourage you to go and explore Sweet Honey in the Rock's music. It is quite incredible. And I hope you enjoyed it this morning as a fitting start to our service. Now, each Sunday, anywhere there is a service held in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, a chalice is lit. The flaming chalice is the symbol of our faith. So if you have joined us this morning by Zoom, I invite you to light a chalice within your home. Our chalice lighting words this morning were written by Reverend Jamie Yandel, who is a chaplain and a UU minister in August, Texas. So I will light the chalice here in the sanctuary as you light your chalices at home. We light this flame to ignite the sacred power of justice. We light this flame so that it may be a beacon of hope in moments of uncertainty, fear, anxiety, and the unknown. We light this flame and are emboldened by its blaze, knowing our strength as a prophetic and powerful people is rooted in the diverse ways we answer the call to love. And throughout the service this morning, if you are here with us in the building, I invite you, if you wish, to come forward and light a candle here in the sanctuary in recognition of whatever you are carrying with you for worship today. At UUFLB, we are a welcoming congregation with a commitment to work together to actively dismantle systemic racism and oppression in all of its forms. Whoever you are, whomever you love, no matter your age or gender or your ancestral or ethnic background, whatever your life experiences and whatever's brought you here this morning, we welcome you to our community of mutual caring and serious intent to grow as spiritual and ethical beings. Unitarian Universalists subscribe to no single religious creed, but we have gathered a set of principles that guide us as we work together to build a religious community. And the principles that we affirm and promote are showing now on the screen and are on the back of your order of service. And this morning, as we celebrate the life and work of Martin Luther King Jr., the principles that really speak to me are the first principle. As a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and also the proposed eighth principle, which this congregation is actively involved in learning about and discussing as part of our process together with the entire UU community within the U.S. to consider the eighth principle. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. The eighth principle truly calling us to action, as indeed Reverend Martin Luther King called us as a people to action. So it is such a joy for us to have guests on Sunday morning, and if we have anyone who's here for the first or second time, we'd like to get to know you. And if you are comfortable doing so on Zoom, I would encourage you to indicate by raising your hand on Zoom that you would like to introduce yourself. Dawn, do we have anyone on Zoom? Okay. Well, I would like to thank everyone for joining us at UUFLB this morning, and hopefully you'll have a few minutes to stay and enjoy coffee and conversation after the service. Reverend Rica, we can't give you coffee or the amazing, wonderful donuts that Jean Paris has sent in for us to enjoy this morning. But if you're able, we would love for you to stay on for a few minutes after the service to be able to talk through Zoom with the folk who are here in the building, as well as the folk who are joined on Zoom. Now on the slide that Dawn will put up for us is some information about upcoming services here at UUFLB. And next week on January 21st, Don West Jr., our own Don West Jr., will be here with us in person to lead our service. And so we're looking forward to that always on the third Sunday of every month. Also coming up in February, at the start of February, Reverend Celia Young will be joining us for another sermon in the series that she's providing, working together with us here at UUFLB. And then the following Sunday on February 11th, Joshua Berg will be joining us. So we have some wonderful services upcoming, and I hope folks are able to come and join. I guess our other announcements include the ongoing Zoom at noon gathering on Mondays at noon, hosted by Paul Bogdan. So this is a wonderful group of people and a way to connect as a community. Please join if you are able. I wish I was able more often. Also, a reminder that on the first Thursday of every month, we as a community work to provide food for the alternative sleeping location in Laguna Canyon, and many thanks to Candy and Paul and Bruce and John who help to make that happen each month. And Phyllis and Dara and others also have been a part of this group, and please contact especially Bruce and John or Candy or Paul or me if you want to become more involved with the Zoom at noon. The final announcement is that there is a worship committee meeting this morning, this week on Tuesday evening by Zoom, and those who want to join and haven't already received an invitation to join, please speak with me after the service. We'd love to hear everyone's voice in the worship committee meeting.
Good morning, everyone on Zoom, and good morning, everyone in Laguna Beach. I am so happy to be joining you this morning. I do, in fact, have very, very fond memories of visiting you on Sundays and preaching, and of your beautiful sanctuary. And I can see it on Zoom now, so I'm very pleased to be here. As I said, I'm joining you from Germany, where it's cold and wet and dark. I mean, not just dark because it's evening here, but it's also just it's just dark. And in this dismal weather, I got a bit of a cold, so I might be coughing here and there a little bit, but I took a Dayquil. I have some water, so we'll make it through together. And if I cough a little bit, just bear with me. But yes, I'm very, very happy to be with you this morning. So let's start with the call to worship. Don't preach about King on King Sunday. This is the title of a widely read blog post that was published a couple of years ago. It is written by the Reverend Kim Hampton, a Black UU minister who in her writing often explores the intersections of race, religion, and popular culture. Instead of preaching on Martin Luther King as a person and as a legacy, She urges ministers, preach what Dr. King would have preached. Now, I don't presume to know the brilliant mind of the Reverend Dr. King, and I clearly don't share his experience of being a Black man in the United States of America. So I can't know for sure what and how he would have preached at this particular point in our history. What I can do, though, is to bring in my own different perspectives as someone growing up abroad in Germany and living there now. So in honor of Dr. King and in the spirit of justice, welcome.
Our opening hymn this morning is number 1015, I Know I Can. So please join as you're comfortable in body, mind, or spirit, and join Carol in singing, and the words will be on the screen. Let us take a moment now to remind ourselves why we come together as a community. I invite you to read these words when and if it feels right for you. And if you've joined us by Zoom, unmute your microphone and your voice will be joined together with us here in the fellowship building. The words of the unison affirmation are on your screen. So please join me in reading. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. So thank you all for joining us today, for being a part of this community, and for committing to make a difference. Our reading this morning is an excerpt from the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have come now to a time in our service to briefly share important events that have touched our lives during this week, both the joys that we amplify when we share them together and the sorrows that give us an opportunity to provide support for each other and to care for each other. So during this time of sharing joys and concerns, we will pause the recording of the service. I first move to our offertory. It is as much a blessing to be able to give as it is to receive. And in this self-governing and self-sustaining community, we recognize that really it is our responsibility both to give and to receive and to do both well, because our fellowship depends on us. It depends on the love and the support and also the generous contributions from our members. So during this time of offering, as Carol plays music for us, we will be passing a basket within the fellowship, and those who are on Zoom will see on their screen additional ways in which you can give. So please join us now. Stand if you wish, and join us in singing to each other these words of sincere gratitude. We sing them every week, but they're so meaningful. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
I invite you now to join me in a moment of calm and meditation. So find a position comfortable to you. Close your eyes or soften your gaze. Become aware of your breathing and slow it down a little bit. Go through your body, feel your feet on the ground, feel your back, maybe leaning against something. See if you can lower your shoulders a little bit. Feel if anything is uncomfortable and if you can make it more comfortable. And then listen with me to these words by my dear friend and colleague, the Reverend Karen G. Johnson. Wise ones say, wise ones say, we can be good, good enough and imperfect all at the same time. Wise ones say that we can listen to understand, not necessarily agree, and be moved by a truth that does not make sense to our lived experience, and let it change our world. They tell us also to raise up those who are trodden upon, to cultivate humility when the world would rather we grow certitude in our hearts. Wise ones remind us we can recognize that those who do harm do not always intend to, and that it is still ours to reckon with the impact. They tell us that we can say, I don't know, and I'm not sure, and still be a warrior, still be whole, still be a leader. In fact, the kind of leader we long for. Wise ones tell us to pay attention to not just the what, but also the how. May this be the meditation of our hearts. May this be the words of our mouths, not just the what, but also the how. May we be the wise ones today and every day. Are we still having music or do I just start?
I think I muted the microphone and it didn't get unmuted, so I think we didn't get the music on Zoom as she came out.
I
So
think
go ahead.
we're ready for you, Reverend Rica.
Thank you. Sorry about the mix-up. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm joining you from Berlin, Germany today, the city where I was born, where I grew up, and where I moved back to in the 2022. But many of you probably know that for a long time I actually lived in the US. In fact, I've preached in that beautiful sanctuary of yours on several occasions. And I have to say that right now I really miss the California sunshine. I always thought I was the first person in my family to visit the US, let alone live there. My parents hadn't been there before I moved there, and neither had my grandparents. Or so I thought. I mentioned this once to Tante Gerdi, Aunt Gerdi, my grandmother's younger sister, and she said, "Oh, but that's not true. Uncle Kurt spent 11 months in Nebraska." Uncle Kurt was her husband and had been my grandfather's best friend since they were young. He collected minerals, which he even let me play with when I was young, very carefully. And he always kept blackberry gumdrops in his shirt pockets for me whenever we came to visit. He also lived in East Germany until the wall fell. So however he made it to the US for 11 months, to Nebraska of all places, was a mystery to me. Tante Gerdi was quick to clear this up for me. Though highly critical of Hitler's regime, Uncle Kurt, like so many others, was drafted as soon as World War II started and stationed in Italy. There, he was captured by American soldiers and brought to the US as a prisoner of war. He was sent to labor on a farm in Nebraska. Now, by the time I found out about this, he had already died, so I never got to hear his recollection of that time. But according to his wife, Tante Gerdi, he actually remembered this time quite fondly. Yes, the work on the farm was hard, but the meals were hearty and plentiful. The beds in the barrack where he and the other German prisoners slept were warm and comfortable. And the farmer's family on whose farm they worked was friendly and welcoming. They had evenings and Sundays off, and during his free time, Uncle Kurt took a drawing class where he created pictures of exotic animals and birds, including a blue parrot that was just brilliant in its color, and he kept that all his life. I actually got to see that as a child. This was in stark contrast to the other relatives who were prisoners of war. My Uncle Max, for example, the third friend in that little trio of my grandfather, Uncle Kurt, and Uncle Max, he was sent to France, where the German soldiers were not even given houses, having to live in cold, wet trenches until they built some raggedy huts themselves. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm well aware of what Germany did in the war. I'm well aware of how they treated the French when they invaded their country. And I understand that the French were not at all inclined to make the lives of POWs comfortable in any way. But for that very reason, I was even more surprised to hear just how well my Uncle Kurt was treated. In fact, Tante Gerdi, mother of an infant in East Berlin, tried her hardest after the war to save enough of their daily living to send care packages with some chocolate and some tobacco to her husband, until he wrote back to her that this was not necessary at all. Not only did they have chocolate and tobacco on the farm, the quality was also much better. I was surprised and I was grateful, because I really loved my Uncle Kurt very much. And also because he was never a supporter of Hitler and his regime, but instead found himself drafted into a war that he never wanted. It makes me feel so grateful and so appreciative of the US that he was treated so well, even as a prisoner of war. Interestingly, though, the few people here to whom I've told this story were just as confused as me. They had never heard of German prisoners of war in the US. It made me wonder if my uncle's story was an isolated case, a rare occurrence. But that notion was actually far from the truth. Years later, while listening to Radiolab, one of my favorite podcasts, Jad Abumrad and Robert Krulwich, the hosts of the show, shone some light on this story in an episode entitled Nazi summer camp. Apparently, towards the end of World War II, there were almost 500,000 prisoners of war in the US, mostly German, but also some Japanese and some Italian soldiers. They were located in every single state except for Vermont, sometimes housed in tent cities or churches or high school gyms, sometimes house and even rodeo grounds until more suitable accommodations could be built. There were over 200 base camps, some of them housing up to 8,000 prisoners. And life in these camps was not bad. People had plenty of food. In fact, they were given so much food that in some cases they could not even finish it all. Though hard work was required, the prisoners were treated well. And during times off, there was even entertainment. Prisoners were given musical instruments, they formed orchestras, there were pottery classes, or, in case of my Uncle Kurt, drawing classes. Of course, not everybody was happy with that. There were people in the population and the media who were quite enraged from the very start about the cushy life of enemy soldiers who were killing the sons of American families in the war abroad. After all, the war took a toll on America as well. But despite growing criticism, the US government held on to their treatment of enemy prisoners of war. The Geneva Conventions had just been signed a little over 10 years before, stating that POWs should be given the same rations and treatments as the soldiers of one's own military. The US abided by these conventions, determined that there should not be a repeat of the gruesomeness of World War I. But of course, we all know that the gruesomeness of World War I was to be overshadowed. We know that Germany did not abide by any laws and conventions. This became clear when US soldiers discovered German prisoners of war camps for American soldiers who were treated cruelly, violently, who were even killed, massacred after surrendering. That Germany did not follow any laws or conventions became even more clear when the concentration camps were discovered. At this point, resources in the US were becoming scarce. Also, in the camps hosting German soldiers, the relative freedom allowed the convinced Nazis, those who were not simply drafted, but who followed Hitler willingly and enthusiastically, to organize themselves, perpetuate their ideologies, and bully prisoners like my Uncle Kurt who did not share their convictions. All of this led to a renewed debate about how many of the scarce resources should be spent on such deplorable people. Should you be fair and humane to those who showed such a blatant disregard for humanity? When push came to shove, there was a vote in Congress, and Congress voted to keep upholding the Geneva Conventions, to keep treating the German prisoners decently. Not only did they say that they didn't want to sink to the same level of Nazis, they did not even want to use Nazis as a standard or a measurement. They decided to stick to their own standards, their own American ideals. And because of that, my Uncle Kurt did not have to suffer. And after some time, he returned safely home. When thinking about that time in American history, when the people here decided to go above and beyond to uphold their ideals, this story always comes to my mind. It really does. I do think this was a choice well made. I don't think it was easy. Upholding one's ideals often is not. Choosing to hold on to one's goodness when faced with such evil is not. but I think it was right, and it fills me with gratitude. But, of course, we also know that during that time, not only good choices were made, because these camps that hosted the German soldiers were not the only camps during that time. There were also the internment camps where over 100,000 people of Japanese ancestry, the majority of them American citizens, were housed after they were yanked out of their lives simply because their background made them seem like a threat. And the conditions in these camps, sparsely erected wooden buildings that did not keep out the cold or the wind, sometimes not even the rain, where up to 25 people were crammed into rooms designed for 4, where there was often no plumbing. The conditions were bad. Food was scarce and of low quality. Lives were destroyed and harm was done. The ruptures in families and the psychological damage that was done carried forth into the next generation as well. And the harm that was done in these camps was done to civilians, mothers and fathers and children, grandfathers and grandmothers, people like you and me, people who did not fire at American sons on the battlefield and who did not commit genocide. And of course, all of this also happened long before the civil rights movement. So segregation was still rampant in any parts of the US, including the US military. I'm so grateful that my Uncle Kurt was treated so kindly, and also the US treated Nazi soldiers better than many of their own citizens. Because both of this is true. And I think it is undeniable that racism played a part in this. I think what this shows is something that also became apparent again in recent years, that in many parts of America, a white life counts more than the life of a person of color, even when the white life is a Nazi soldier or sympathizer. Holding this hard bit of truth is also an act of love. Now, in the podcast that I mentioned, the hosts also bring up racism. But in addition, they quote Paul Springer, a military historian who raises another reason, not one to replace racism as an explanation for this grave and unjust discrepancy in treatment, but to add to it. He says that one of the main differences was that there were clear rules governing international law, like the Geneva Conventions, when it came to the treatment of war prisoners. The same was not true for American citizens. In fact, even Japanese soldiers who became prisoners of war were treated far better than the American civilians of Japanese ancestry in the internment camps. For them, there were no clear rules. They were in a weird gray zone outside of the law. I say that this explanation is an addition to that of racism because I think they go hand in hand. Within systemic racism, having rules applied to you, laws work in your favor, is not a basic right, but a privilege that not everyone enjoys. And we have seen this time and time again. We have seen this when, after 9/11, the Bush administration announced that people suspected of sympathizing with Al-Qaeda were terrorists, not prisoners of war, and therefore the Geneva Conventions did not apply, leading to the infamous prison camps of Guantanamo Bay. To this day, of the 780 prisoners who were taken at Guantanamo Bay, 27 detainees still remain at camp. They've been held there for nearly 2 decades without a trial. And we've also seen this a few years ago when the Trump administration decided that the rights usually guaranteed to asylum seekers did not apply at the southern border, separating children from their parents, holding people in dehumanizing and cruel conditions, and making a mockery of legal procedure when 3-year-old children were asked to make their case in front of immigration judges. We've seen this when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882, a law severely restricting immigration to the US, the first law to suddenly do so for one specific group, after centuries of Europeans freely and legally entering the US to start new lives here. We see this every time the police violates people of color, especially Black people, employing measures of drastic and even fatal violence for minor infractions or for even just existing, with often little to no legal consequences for the officers. And of course, we see this in the very juxtaposition of the ideals and values of the Declaration of Independence, with its grand opening promise that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and the fact that from the very start, these rights, these promises were reserved only for white men, excluding women, people of color, and even leaving room for chattel slavery and genocide. And yet, regardless of this exclusion, in his speech, I Have a Dream, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King claims these rights for himself, for people of color, just as much as for white men, as for the white men for which they were originally intended, saying, "This note was a promise to all men. Yes, Black men as well as white men would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring the sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked with insufficient funds." Dr. King does not take issue with American ideals, but with the inconsistencies of their application. And it is these inconsistencies precisely that have and still do create systems of oppression and of structural racism. It is our duty to alleviate the ongoing injustice that keeps pouring out all of these inconsistencies. What I love about this country is that there are ideals and laws and a promise that allowed for my Uncle Cord, an enemy soldier, to be treated decently and fairly. What breaks my heart and fills me not just with despair, but also with the urgent need to work for change, is the fact that the same ideals, laws, and promises are not fulfilled in the same way for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the US. Today, on Martin Luther King Day, we recommit ourselves to this struggle for justice and for a consistent application and upholding of these ideals and promises that stand out even within our often muddled history. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Maybe for some of you, these sentences and what they imply are part of what you love about the US. I think that they are good rules to live by as a country. These sentences are a good underlying foundation for all other laws and rules we may come up with. And maybe It is now time to stop viewing these sentences as just the ideals that the country was founded on and that we may aspire to, but as binding rights and promises, and a resulting duty for all of us, for all Americans, to make sure that they are applied equally and consistently to all. May it be so, and blessed be.
We need to unmute the laptop in the sanctuary.
Thank you, Reverend Rica, for being here with us today, for sharing with us your ideas and your thoughts, for asking us to think more deeply about the words that we've learned, the words that we hear, and what they really mean through the perspective of the eyes of the many people who are affected by the way in which we work to live out our ideals. We're so grateful that you've been here with us today. We want to end with our closing hymn. It is number 1028 in the Teal hymnal, and the words will be on the screen. And it's maybe a hymn with words for us to go out and live by, the fire of commitment. We extinguish our chalice now. We extinguish it. We extinguish the light in this building, but we bring it out of the building into our lives, in our hearts, and in our words and actions.
In words adapted von John Johnston, we shall overcome. When we can truly celebrate the diversity of contributions and talents offered by all people, we shall overcome hatred and prejudice and oppression. When we can truly extend our hands to one another in loving acceptance, we shall overcome the past that haunts us now. Living in peace and freedom, we shall right the wrongs that have been committed and the debts left unpaid. Let us join together in the commitment to overcome.
Now please join us and rise as you are comfortable in singing our closing song, Let There Be Peace on Earth.